Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This week, I am delighted to have someone who's become a dear friend of mine. I've known him for over 11 years, grew up in Tasmania, a wealth of experience, particularly he's a chartered psychologist. He also, sport and exercise was a fascination to him, the sports science, and he's taught me so much about that. He's been a CEO, he's been a Vice-Chancellor at the university. He's got a wealth of experience, and he's particularly passionate about people's education and ensuring that our universities don't forget the most important thing, the student, rather than somebody writing a nice paper and becoming famous as a teacher and forget that actually their job is to bring on the next generation of our brightest and our best. Without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself.
Well, hello everybody. My name's Craig Mahoney. As Jonathan just mentioned, I'm delighted to be here today as part of the Inspiring Leadership series that Jonathan runs. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts with you over the next 60 minutes with the questions that Jonathan poses. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. It is great having you here. And so many people over the 11 years that I've known you have been inspired and excited by the work that you've done. And it's always, leadership has always interested you. We've had lots of discussions. For you, what does inspiring leadership mean?
Yeah, it's a great question, and probably my answer will be vague, if not imprecise. I don't know what I think about myself as a leader, but I know what I think of other people who I've seen and been inspired by. And I've had the privilege throughout my career of coming across some great people who have been my line managers and my leaders, and I've looked up to them and learned from them. And so inspiring leaders for me are people who can create a vision for the organization that they work in that other people want to align with and want to follow. So it's about followership partly, but not on the basis of coercion, on the basis of influence and creative potential that others want to be aligned to. And so that's what I would define as inspiring leadership. And I've tried to do that myself in any leadership roles that I've had.
Fantastic. No, and it is so true. Without followership, you can't have leadership. You can declare yourself to be an inspiring leader and have the name on the door, but if others haven't said they found you inspiring, then it's not right. And I do get approached by various agencies who want their person on. They say, this person's paying me to tell you they're inspiring. Please, can they come on the series? And I go, thank you. And actually, I'd rather have someone who others recommend, like you. You've had a fascinating life experience. Began, as I understand it, in Tasmania. And also, we worked together quite a while when you were the CEO of the Higher Education Academy and also at the University of the West of Scotland, where you did some amazing work in both organizations. Things shape us in life. As you say, we talked about transitions before. There's a book called Life is in the Transitions. We often go, this is a period of stability. Now I've got some change. I'll wait till the change is over and then life carries on there. But no, it's the transition, hard or high or low, peaks or valleys. Those are the bits that teach us the most. When you look back over your amazing life thus far, how have you sort of mapped out your life journey and what events have really shaped you? I call them defining moments, but what if you were to think of that, what would you say some of the events on the way from a young lad?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of those. I suppose I'd want to start by saying that despite the fact I'm a Boy Scout, and I'm very proud of that fact, having gone through Scouts from when I was about 6 or 7 right through to when I was 20 and went to university, I probably haven't mapped my life and career as well as I should have done. Yeah, the motto of be prepared in scouting, I think I am be prepared in most things in life, but probably not for the career that has taken me from Tasmania, where I grew up on a farm, to where I am now, living in the UK, and I've been in the UK for quite a number of years now, several decades. That was never on the landscape. I grew up on a farm. Life was very simple as far as I knew. My parents were relatively uneducated. They had left school at primary 6. They didn't go to secondary school because their parents couldn't afford to. They were both children in very large families, and at 11 years of age, you were expected to go and work, so they did. So university education and the journey that I've taken and the career I've pursued were never something that was promoted to me as a youngster because it just wasn't understood. I only look back recently to identify the fact that I probably knew nobody who'd been to university when I was young, except for the fact that I'm making an assumption that our local GP had been to university. I don't think I knew anybody else that had ever been to university. So it really wasn't a journey I was intending to pursue. And as you know, and will probably come out further in this series, sport has also always been a very heavily passionate area of my life. And being an Australian by birth, that's not unexpected. And so, you know, I played competitive sport. So my early life was about going to school, being on the farm and playing racket sports. And I never projected forward to what a career might look like and what areas of life I might pursue. And you know, if you ask me later in this series, this sequence, you know, what did I want to achieve in life? I'm not sure, but I'm very proud of what I have achieved. But the planning to it probably didn't arrive until after I'd arrived in the UK, which was in my 30s. And I thought, in higher education, where I was beginning to apply my energy, I thought I can probably be a leader in this sector, in this field. And I did set about more diligently planning a career pathway that would create the possibility of me becoming a leader and a vice-chancellor to a university, which I am very proud to have said I achieved on 2 occasions.
Yeah, and in fact, two thoughts come to mind. First one, I want to talk about England football and the women, because I want to hear your view, because, you know, sport has mattered so much. How important is that? And the second one is perhaps if you picked out 2 people who've really influenced you, who were inspiring leaders, that you took some of their best, you know, characteristics. But let's just go. What do you think is the lesson that we should learn from the England football win 2-1 over Germany? Nothing done like that since 1966, and how important it is to us in not just this country, but just as role models elsewhere.
Look, I come from a country where sport is considered to be equally important to health and education, and it's funded accordingly. And the UK has never really followed that model. And so I was delighted, as we date stamp this in July 2022, when the England women were able to win the European Cup. It's fair to say that sport in the UK, and I'm not saying Australia is better, but sport in the UK has been very sexist. There's been a predominance of male sport profiling for a long time. It's changing in certain sports, but it hasn't changed very much in football. And it was great to see that the women actually could come out through that tournament on top, having not lost a game, and showing to the UK and the rest of the world that sport, whether it's male or female, in this case it's female, is great to watch, is good entertainment. And they packed the stadium with more people that have ever watched a European final in men's or women's football ever. You know, so you know, what a great outcome that is for sport, but for women's sport, and hopefully to raise some of the things that I'm very committed to and passionate about, and that is equality, diversity, and inclusion. In this case, we're talking about sex equality, male to female, but equality and the diversity that we need in the world to achieve the best in so many different fields, it's far from where it needs to be. And this is one small step, but it's also a big step. And I think that we can look forward with some positivity to the impact this will have.
Yeah, it's just so exciting. Someone was explaining to me that women played a lot of football just at the end of the First World War in the UK, and it was very popular, and they got huge crowds. And then, bless them, the men in British football put their foot down. They said, "You can't play on our pitches," and they basically killed it off for almost 100 years until now. Bam! In it comes. I know it's been going on for a while, but just to this level, it's great to see, and the role models it provides.
Yeah.
Talking of role models, can you think back over your career, perhaps even the time that you came to the UK in your 30s, when there's been a couple of people who you'd like to name, who you have found inspiring leaders, and what were their qualities that you've taken away and aspired to emulate?
It's a question which I will merge across into being inspiring leaders to also just being inspiring people, and it comes from a very early age, and so I'm not going to restrict myself to 2. Sorry, you learn in 2 directions, or I learn in 2 directions. I learn inspiring capabilities from others, and I learn inspiring things not to do that others have shown me as well. And the first of those started in primary 1, when I had a teacher that didn't like me. Unfortunately, that teacher travelled with me into primary 2. And so I had a very difficult time, which my brother and I still talk about, in early primary education, when the teacher that was looking after me didn't foster my capabilities, and I performed very poorly, and my report cards demonstrate that. And then I jumped forward to secondary education when I had a fantastic maths teacher, Mrs. Poole. And I loved maths. I was very good at maths and science, and they were my preferred subjects. And Mrs. Poole was a big inspiration to me in the capability of my potential around mathematics. And then I jumped forward to university where I studied chemistry and maths, and I had a fantastic chemistry lecturer that covered many of the chemistry areas throughout my 4 years of my degree. And I don't know what it was about him, because a lot of people didn't like him, but I got on really well with him, and he inspired me in the subject, but also inspired me in terms of his ability to demonstrate how to teach and create learning outcomes and positive learning environments. And that was probably where the passion for me being an educator arose from. And then when I traveled to the UK, which is, date stamping that's probably about 12 years after that chemistry lecture had inspired me, I came across a lot of people that, for me, and then I was moving away from sciences and maths, I was moving towards sport. And I came across academics in the area of sports science who were creating in me a belief in the excitement around this subject area, one of them being Craig Sharp, Professor Craig Sharp. Unfortunately, passed away just a couple of years ago, but he was considered to be one of the forefathers of exercise physiology here in the UK and in the world, actually, and did an amazing amount of research and application of research through the Olympic movement and elsewhere that became a great close friend of mine, and right up until his death a couple of years ago. And it's fair to say he's probably one of the most inspirational people I've ever come across. And that was a combination of his broad knowledge, but the way he could present a story and inspire people and bring them forward and give them a passion for subjects, which is what, as an educator, you want to do. You want to create a class full of people who are excited by your subject and want to study it more and go and do more reading rather than merely turn up to your lecture and just listen to you. And Craig did that for me in an amazingly impressive way. And yeah, he certainly became an inspiration for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we'll talk a bit more when we go to the health question about exercise physiology and 1 or 2 tips for people listening these days, because I do find the whole area fascinating. Looking back over your whole life so far, we learn a lot from the peaks and from the valleys. If you were to pick one particular moment that was one of your proudest in your life, what was that? What did you learn from it? And then also a darkest moment of your life and what you learned from that.
Yeah, you're always giving me numbers to work with, and that's always more difficult to say. I pick one. I've had a lot of peaks in my life of achievement that have really excited me, and they start with getting my first job, of course. When I started working here in the UK in the area of sports science and began to apply my psychology more than my physiology into elite performance. One of the most outstanding experiences of my life was being part of the team that helped Derry County win the All-Ireland Gaelic Football Championships in 1993. It's like the World Championships of Gaelic football. They'd never won the championship. They'd been in the final once in '57. They've not been in a final since then. And it was an amazing achievement that we had this Cinderella year in '93, and I was very much part of that team. And it's a real high point in my professional career as a psychologist to be working with that group of players, achieving that pinnacle. But there are so many others, and that's probably the one that I would throw out there. But also, too, when I talked earlier about my journey toward becoming a vice-chancellor, it's not an easy task to become a vice-chancellor. There's a limited number of available places for people to get them. To get one is a huge privilege. And when in 2013 I was able to secure the vice-chancellorship at the University of the West of Scotland, that was an incredibly proud moment for me, incredibly proud.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. And we draw a lot from these, because I think we can be, particularly if we're high achievers, as I know you are, and I'm pushed to achieve so much. It is useful to look back on these moments and what shaped us. I'm about to do a very interesting course in December called the Hoffman Institute 7-day process, which is like about sort of 3 years of psychotherapy squeezed into 7 days. And you go back and you look at your childhood and some of the people who shaped you, and particularly your caregivers up to the age of 13. And of course, my father was killed when I was 2.5. And so primary caregiver, mother, and sometimes my grandmother, who stayed with us for a while before the age of 13. And then also as away at boarding school from the age of 7 or 8, which is another sort of key caregiver. But one of the things that's interesting is this psychological concept that we either, with some of our primary caregivers, we either copy them and be like father or mother, or we do the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think back to, you know, that first teacher you had who was so hard on you. I had a similar kind of experience, and then one that believed in you. And I had a similar thing. And actually, at that young age, it's incredibly influential on everything you do thereafter. And I know that in the case, my equivalent of the teacher who was giving you such a hard time, mine said to me, Jonathan, you're stupid. You can't do your maths and you can't spell. You're going to be a dustman. You're going to be, you know, collect rubbish on the lorries if you don't improve and get better. You know, you're not going to make anything of your life. And I was bloody determined to prove this woman, Mrs. Gypsum, wrong. I mean, I'm sure the old lady's dead long time ago. But actually, in that particular case, rather than give up and go, she's right, didn't. And I think the other thing which helped me was my mother went, okay, you know, she might have said that, but you're going to be good with people. That's going to be what you're good. So like that sort of concept of what you can, that belief of what you can do, as opposed to someone who says what you can't. What about a dark moment in your life, and how have you learned from that? Because we all have dark moments, and you know, I'm sure, like me, you've had many highs and lows in your work and in your personal life. But if you were to, again, pick one, but just a generic theme from some of the dark moments, what has it taught you that helps you be a more inspired leader going forward?
Yeah, look, again, as you say, we've all had a lot of dark moments, and I certainly won't have any less than you. But one of the darkest moments has happened quite recently to me, and that's losing a job. And you know, it's been a hard lesson to accept, particularly when the basis to the decision isn't all that clear, and you feel as though it's an unfair decision. And yeah, my immediate reaction was a grief response, and I became very angry very quickly. And I'm getting over that, but there's still anger there, and also an element of motivation and confidence loss. And you know, certainly even just in this weekend just gone, I did feel myself to be demotivated. I felt lethargic. I felt purposeless. I felt lacking in credibility. I'd lost an identity, and I struggled with that over the weekend. And I, spent a bit of time talking to myself on Sunday night and rebuilding some of that. And I've come into this week now. It's Tuesday, feeling more resilient. And the recovery of that resilience is something I've known I've always had. It's a little bit like when I was playing sport. You'd lose a match in a competitive environment, professional environment, and it hurt. But I would always go into a period of reflection, demise, and then come back with resilience to, okay, let's improve that next time. Because like you, I have a very strong drive and I want success.
Yeah, and it is so interesting, knowing you this at the last 11 years, is that unfortunately too many CEOs, vice-chancellors and other leaders that I've met in different walks of life never seem to learn from the past. They just bulldoze on. Yeah, okay, it didn't work out. And you are reflective, and it's a fine balance. We can reflect too much, but I think unless we're prepared, those who have failed to learn from history are apt to repeat it, that old curse. And I think you do spend time reflecting and thinking about it, a bit like in your games, when you won a game, whether it be a racket game or whatever it might, or you lost it. Each of them are worthy of an after-action review, an AAR, as you and I used to talk about it. What worked well, what would made it even better. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that and being so open about that, because I think a lot of people listen to successful leaders like you and others, and they go, they've just had a gilded life. I mean, I can't relate to those people. Everything's been given to them on a plate, and they've just gone from one success to another, earning loads of money and having a really good life. If only they knew the experiences that people had and how very human they are. And you, like some of the best leaders I know, are very human, and you learn from those mistakes. Now, people listening might have young children coming up to that 16 to 18-year-old stage. If you were to go back and meet the young Craig Mahoney, coming off the farm in Tasmania, thinking about what to do, breaking with the past of, what's done around here. We don't go to university. I remember there was Field Marshal Lord Bagnall. Was he, I think, a Field Marshal Bagnall? Anyway, he was a general, let's say. And he was in my regiment. And he went to see his commanding officer at one stage. And he said, so I want to go to Staff College to learn to become a general. And he went, Staff College? We don't go to Staff College in this regiment. Oh, right. So he changed regiments to one that was a cavalry regiment that was much more driven, and he went on to become one of the brightest minds of his generation. But for you, a bit of advice to a 16 to 18-year-old or people who've got those, this matters in life and this doesn't. From your perspective, what worked for you? What would you share?
Yeah, look, I'm sure we all reflect on life and think, what if? Because a slide I like to use in presentations shows a kitchen fork stuck in the road. And it's a metaphor for me that we all come to forks in the road and we have to make a choice, and we go left or we go right or whatever the directions may be. And we all make those choices, and we don't know what it might have been like if we'd chosen the other fork. And I look back on my career and I think, okay, I made some choices which have taken me to where I am, and I'm very proud of that journey that I've had. But perhaps if I did it again, I might do it differently. And so, for example, one very pertinent example here is that as I said, university wasn't something that was common in our family, but because my older brother had gone to university and he and I were very competitive, I went to university for that reason. There was no other reason I went to university other than because he's gone, I'm not going to let him beat me, so I'm going as well. And that wasn't the best motive to go to university. It's worked out well for me, but I was also developing quite a healthy career around squash. And by going to university for 4 years, I lost 4 years of professional competitive squash that I do live with regret on, because some of the achievements I wanted to make through elite professional squash, I didn't make. And I think part of the reason for that is because the formative years and the early years of a professional career would be in those late teens, early 20s. And I was at university, so I couldn't tour. And I think, if I'd taken that journey, life would have been very different for me. Although, and I promote this fact very strongly, there's an obsession in the UK, more I think than in Australia, that when you get to 16, 17, 18, you should be assuming that you're thinking about university education. And whilst we have a compulsory level of education up to secondary school that students, all youngsters have got to do, the obsession that you must then immediately go to university, I think, is wrongly placed, and it's about readiness. And for me, the readiness for university probably wasn't when I was 18, when I went. It was probably later in life. And that's why in my 30s, I came back to university. And it's about having the bravery and the confidence to say, do things in life when you're ready. And that's probably going to work out better for you. And I've got one of my sons, my oldest son, who didn't go to university. He dropped out of school when he was 16. I hated the fact, because I worked in universities. But he went to university when he was 23 because he said, I need a degree, Dad.
It's so interesting, as you and I have discussed before. Possibly a reaction, someone once said, maybe to the loss of my father and how I coped with information. But I was dyslexic and had dyscalculia as a child. So numbers and spelling, the teacher was incredibly cruel, because she just had no idea of the fact that I think they call it neurodiversity nowadays. Right. There's a term for it. But instead, she was just damning me as becoming a dustman. And I'm sure becoming a dustman is a very happy career for many people. I saw a young lad running along by the dust cart today with his dad. It was during the holidays, and he was having the time of his life. He's having a great time. Yeah. It's not what you do, it's whether you enjoy doing it.
Yes.
But this really does shape you. There's this whole about what's right for you and what's not right for you. And I wasn't ready at the age of, I went into the army to Welbeck College, and then from there you're supposed to go to university and then to Santos and then university. I didn't go. I chose not to. I opted out, and I'm very pleased, because it was much later in life that I did my master's degree, and I was really ready for it and hungry. And goodness, I'm obsessive about listening to audiobooks, probably 200 or 300 in the last couple of years. So there's a time in your life when you're ready for it, and so it's not, everybody's at different levels. let's go round the Inspiring Leadership Compass, which you know well, with the 8 components of it, and just share some of your experiences and tips, if you would, Craig. The first one is the moral quotient. It's the true north. It's the being authentic. It's following what's right for you. And your journey, as Colin Powell said, it worked for me, was the name of his book in Leadership and Life. And some things have worked for you, and they haven't. But what have you done when you found your fundamental values, you let them slip for whatever reason? You were dragged off by ambition or other things, and you sort of let them slip, and you realized you had to get yourself back on to your true north. What's your tip to people when they lose their way? I mean, I know Boris is completely unsavable, but if it was people with normal set of values that they do occasionally stick to them, what would be your advice about getting yourself back onto your true north, the authentic you with your values?
Yeah, I watched one of your podcasts where you were talking about Boris Johnson and his loss of moral compass, and you basically said it was impossible for him to get back. It's a good question at this point in my life and my career, because it relates probably to where I've just come from, in that the sector I work in, higher education, I'm very clear about what my moral compass is for that, and it's about the support to students to achieve the award that they've entrusted us as a university to come and get. And other things around that are peripheral. I'm not saying they're unimportant, but things like research and enterprise and the other things are less important to me in my belief of higher education than ensuring that those young people who come to us get the support they need to get to where they hope to be. And so leaving the University of Western Scotland, as I did earlier this year, to take up a job in London, where that moral compass of mine did not align with the organisation I went to, is probably the reason why it didn't work out for me. And it's, as much as I'm angry about what's happened, it's probably reassuring for me to realise that my moral compass is more important to me than the perspectives that a profit-based organisation might have that I don't share.
Yeah.
And so I stepped back from that and thought, your moral compass is okay.
Yeah, and this is thank you, Craig, for being so open about that one. This is a thing that time and again other CEOs and other leaders that I've had have found themselves as a CEO and as a vice chancellor. It's not black and white. It's so clear. It's like democracy, as Churchill said, the least worst of all the forms of government. They're all flawed, and CEOs have to cope with shades of grey. But if you've ever listened to anything about Mossack Fonseca and the Panama Papers, I mean, they just had completely no moral compass at all with whether it's Gaddafi they were supporting or dodgy businessmen hiding money offshore or princes or whoever they might be. They had no moral compass whatsoever. So that's not grey. That's completely black. It's not white. But I think that there are times when many of these leaders come to a key moment where they go, the drive for profit over everything else is not something I'm prepared to sacrifice, and they choose to leave. And this is why a number that I know want to go into charitable sectors or do other work where they're giving back, because they find that there comes a point. This is an interesting point about the corporation. A corporation is psychopathic in its nature. This is a conversation I had with Professor Roger Steer. He said it has a legal identity, but it has no heart and it has no soul.
No.
Whereas people who make up the organization, they do have heart and soul, and they want to have a passion for what they do and the inspiration they have. So it is a problem. What you've alluded to is a problem that many will face, and you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and go, am I prepared to sell my soul for the Yankee dollar, or am I actually going to say that this is not for me? Or can we have a mission which does do good for students in education and helping them come on, which still makes a profit, but not at any cost? So I think it's very interesting. Okay, taking from that on to the next part, PQ, which is meaning and purpose quotient. So, your vocation, your dharma, I think you've alluded to it. What gives your life meaning and purpose now? And as you're thinking about what next for you, if you're thinking about what next for you, which carries on you being on purpose, living your life on purpose, not off purpose, What is if you could have the ideal kind of role for you, what would it be next?
It would be a role that probably remains in and around somewhere to do with education. I have a passion for education. It's not the only thing I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about sport as well. But both of them, for me, have a similar manifestation of what I want to achieve, and that is to support the development of others. It's always, and certainly as you get older, it's for me, it's been fundamentally important that I am leaving a legacy that's not attributed to me, but is about supporting younger people and whatever you want to interpret by younger, in giving them skills and knowledge of the experiences that I've had before they might acquire them through their own life experience. And so as a psychologist and as a performance psychologist, I've always seen my role as one where I'm trying to enhance the rate at which a person picks up the mental and cognitive characteristics of success before they will ultimately learn them anyway, because they will learn them anyway, but they may be physically unable to then use them. And that's what performance psychology is about. And for me, it's the same in life. My education experiences have always been about trying to enhance the capability of others. And I willingly give my time to anybody who wants it if they think I can be useful to them. So when students or staff or colleagues across the world ever ask me, Craig, can I have some of your time? I'll always give it, much to the chagrin of my wife, but I'll always give it because if they think that I can be valuable to them, I want to help them. That happened earlier today. I had a colleague, a vice-chancellor at another university, phone me up and say, Craig, can you give me 2 hours of your time to help me with something? And I said, sure. And he said, how much will you charge? And I said, it's not about the money. I said, I'm happy to give you my time. And so, yeah, we've agreed to do that on the 16th of August. So for me, giving back and helping other people who want some access to your knowledge and experience is crucial to my being.
Yeah, that's so lovely, and so you. And also, you alluded to your wife. Your wife is also comes from an education background. Do you want to just say what you find special about your wife and her work in education?
Oh God, she did say she was going to come and listen to this, so she might come through that back door in a minute. Look, yeah, you're right. She works in education, higher education, the same as I do. We're both fairly similar in our belief about the purpose of education and the value that it brings. And we're both always trying to give back and make a difference in the lives of others. So there's a very common shared theme between the two of us in our perspectives and the ideals that we hold. And perhaps sometimes what we believe in is idealistic, but it's that idealism that has taken me through my life and enabled me to do it my way. With as she often says, you're too idealistic. Yeah, I am. I know that. But I'm not going to change because I believe that's the right approach for me.
Yeah, well, idealistic and also, but you're passionate about it, and it's often the passion that people follow, particularly when it has a strong moral compass, but combined with passion. So it's that sense of moral quotient with purpose, leaving a legacy, which we'll come on to at the very end, and also lovely combining with the sports, which brings me on to the third, which is the health question. So this is brain health and physical health, something that you've studied way before it was fashionable. You were interested in it. And as you know, now I'm in my 60s, I'm really interested in keeping healthy. I've just come back from the chiropractor where she just did a little bit of manipulation after having done 10,000 meters of level 2 rowing, zone 2 rowing. And she said, you're in good shape, which I'm pleased about, thank God, because, yoga helps, doesn't it, when we get older, to keep those stretching going. But what's your tip about exercise physiology? A couple of tips about perhaps physical health, and the brain health we talk a lot about, but you might want to talk about both. Let's just talk about this area a bit.
I do think they're inseparable, and for a long time in my profession outside of higher education, I was an advocate and a consultant for both exercise physiology and sport and exercise psychology, and the two of them are intrinsically linked. There is no question that you can't really have mental health without physical health, and you can't really have physical health without mental health. But look, the early part of my time in the UK, I was a research assistant working in Northern Ireland, researching coronary heart disease, one of the biggest killers of people in Northern Ireland and also Scotland. The UK is not terribly good either. And it taught me a lot of lessons about the importance of regular physical activity, minimum expectations, elevations of heart rate, eating the right food, but at the same time having a positive mental attitude. And I say those things as if they're throwaway and simple. And I want to reinforce the fact that none of those things are straightforward and simple. They require a lot of effort, and for some people, they are very, very difficult to achieve, even start. And certainly, doing that research for 3 or 4 years as I did, we were able to identify markers of coronary heart disease later in life that children were exhibiting, and how you might try and change through education the prospect of that being averted so that they wouldn't have an early demise or a limitation to their later life. Because people make, when you're young, you believe you're invincible and you make assumptions, well, if I die, I'll die quickly. That's not often the case. People often have long, extended periods of illness before they die. And a lot of that can be averted if they have the right approach to physical and mental health. And so my advice here would be, whatever age you are, whatever size you are, whatever sex you are, whatever ability you may have, whatever background you come from, exercise is important. And exercise doesn't need to be going out and doing your rowing exercise that will have elevated your heart rate quite considerably. It's as simple as walking up and down stairs or taking some walking exercise, because for some people, that's as much as they can do. And there's nothing wrong with that. Regular walking, 20, 30 minutes a day, and most people can find the time to put that in. I appreciate I'm making an assumption there, but most people can find the time to put in 20 or 30 minutes of time per day to do some walking. Over time, you'll gain some fitness from that. Watch out for your diet, and always look at your mental health and make sure that's being cared for as well. All these things are interlinked in a way which can't be separated, and I advocate to anybody out there listening to this, whatever your background, if you're not exercising at the moment, please do some and begin to work on your mental health as well.
Yeah, very, very wise words, and so important to us. One of the things I'm working on, Craig, which you'll smile, is because I'm quite keen on helping people get healthy and fit, both mental and physical health, having either been injured or at times my mental health has taken a hit because of some situations I've been in. Having a bit like a non-smoker, who's given up, I'm now become sort of obsessive about it. And I've just got to be careful. I don't look at people and think, come on, you could do so much more if you only do this and this and this. Some people don't want to do that. You've got to have it with people who do want to develop. It's a good reminder. The next one round is EQ, emotional and social intelligence. You and I have spoken about this at length. And again, it goes back to the patterns that we had from our parents. That's the way they behave. So we just behave that way. We haven't really given it much consideration. But as you and I both know, we can develop emotional and social intelligence, just like we can develop physical fitness and mental fitness. What would be a top tip that you've learned that you'd pass on to others? Say, look, this is a really important one in the way you build rapport and get on with other people.
Yeah, I can recall one of the first ever sessions I had with you when you talked to me about my language. I won't repeat the phrase, you might, but I won't. It really struck a chord with me. I had known for a long time that as an Australian, I'm fairly direct and I'm fairly outspoken. And in my country, that's pretty typical and not abnormal, and it really isn't necessarily problematic. But in the UK, where people are much more reserved and not so direct or outspoken as I was, it demonstrated to me, and you taught me some really strong lessons around this, that my emotional intelligence was pretty poor. And I spent a lot of time, certainly since I met you, but I had started before that, trying to work on how to enhance my emotional intelligence. And I think I'm better at it. I wouldn't say I'm excellent, but I think I'm much better at it now. So much so that I often enter conversations with people being more sensitive to their emotions than the words they're saying, because quite often you can pick up from the emotion of a situation the trauma that person's going through, where your help is going to be advantageous, rather than listening to the words and missing the emotion. And I can recall, before I met you, on a leadership event once, where the task that we were given in pairs was to go to a place, and we were staying in a hotel in Edinburgh at the time. So the person I was working with, we went to an outside space and sat on a bench in the environment that we were sitting in, this very nice hotel with lots of grounds. And we had to take a minute or two to describe what we were feeling, what we were sensing. And I was very, very objective. And I was saying, well, we're sitting outside, the weather's okay. And everything I did was almost mathematical. And the lady that I was working with at the time, when it was her turn, she went second. she gave a totally different perspective to this around the aura of the situation, the emotion of the situation, and things which just had not, they were over my head in my explanation. But when she told them to me, I thought, oh, wow, I've missed all that. And I had missed all that. And it was because I was emotionally unintelligent. Yeah. And so I'm talking there back in the early 2000s. And it was a starting point for me on a journey which you enhanced even more, to become much more aware of the emotions of a situation and how to make use of and develop your own emotional intelligence in an advantageous way to be able to pick up on situations that I had been oblivious to before that.
Yeah, oh, it's great, and it's been lovely to see your fascination with learning about it, and also almost like catching yourself when you're getting off track, and you just course correcting and just apologizing, course correcting, and going back in. The other thing which you've led the way in so many ways is what I call CQ, cultural intelligence, around collaborative, cognitive, and cultural. It's a whole mix of things, but particularly people would recognize it through diversity, equality, and inclusion. What would you give as a top tip for leaders listening who want to, they know it's important, it's never out of the news, but what would you give as one practical tip about developing better diversity, equality, and inclusion in their organization?
That's a great question, and one that I could probably talk on for about an hour and a half about, but I won't. It's an area that I'm very passionate about. I've got 5 mixed race children. I spend a lot of time trying to understand how it can be. People look at me and say, okay, you're a white privileged individual male, which, to some extent I am, but as we highlighted earlier, nobody's journey is as straightforward as it appears to somebody else. And my life has not been without discrimination, but it's different discrimination than other people will experience. I accept that. And so to any leader, what I would say is, don't assume you know everything about equality, diversity, and inclusion, and keep asking questions. There's nothing more rewarding, I think, for somebody who feels that they are discriminated against or oppressed or cannot be their true self. And that's a measure for me. Can a person be their true self? Is an example of where you're getting it right around creating the right culture for equality, diversity, and inclusion. I remember reading a story in the papers 1 or 2 years ago during the pandemic where a black actor here in London was saying that it'd taken him a long time to get some level of equality around his blackness, his skin color, and get acceptance for that. But what he had never felt able to describe to anybody else was the fact that he was also an HIV carrier and had been for 20 years. And he therefore could not be his true self. And when he finally was able to come out and say, well, I'm also an HIV positive individual, he said it was uplifting, it was enlightening. Now, the fact that he couldn't be his true self, that's discrimination. And leaders need to ask that question of the people around them, close to them, and those across the organization. Can everybody in your organization be their true self, regardless of whatever their background or their inspiration, their aspiration, or their characteristics might be? And it's not just restricted to the 9 statutory obligations we have around equality. It goes further than that. And I think we sometimes don't give the credibility to the breadth of things that need to be done here to be able to sort this out. And it's very easy to talk about sex discrimination or sex equality, male and female. It's more than that. There are so many parts of the equality legislation which are being ignored by organisations. And I implore any leader listening to this, have a look at your own organisation, because it won't be as good as you think.
Yeah, it's such a big topic, and I think people will be very fortunate if you were able to give any talks to them about that topic, because I love that one. Can a person be their true self? I think I'm taking that one away, and I'll carry that with me throughout my life. Which takes me on to a link to that RQ, resilience quotient. Coping with people who do face discrimination have to learn ways of being resilient until they're able to address it. But coping with adversity, setbacks, disappointments, just as you've experienced recently, it does require you to dig deep and have resilience. But as you were telling me earlier in the health quotient aspect of it, the two are very closely linked, because sometimes some people are very resilient and they keep driving on and pushing on. They never take breaks and they don't take holidays. And one of the basketball players, he doesn't have a summer break. He just works more on his game. And you go, okay. But the problem is they push their resilience to such a level that they themselves suffer. Their health, mental and physical, suffers because they've overdone the resilience. I've got to be hard, what was that? They say, work hard, make no waves, be more than you seem. That was a tip I was given by one of the generals when I won an award as a young officer. It was from the General von Moltke, the German-Prussian general. And I thought, that's interesting. I do like the humility. And of course, work hard is always the answer, but not at all costs. So what's your tip on resilience and picking yourselves up when things have knocked you down?
Well, for different people, they react in different ways. Resilience is a characteristic that we all need to develop because there'll always be setbacks in life, and they'll be personal, professional, and probably other areas as well. And each of us reacts differently to that. What's tragic is if somebody goes into a spiral of depression that means they can't recover from that. And that's probably more likely if all their other fuel stores are diminished because they've not taken the right sort of work-life balance. I think one of the things that I'm realizing from this interregnum I'm having at the moment between jobs is that I probably needed a break. I would prefer not to have taken it this way, but I probably needed a break. And so not to have the daily grind and the next meeting and the next objective fluctuating around in my mind constantly at the moment. I'm actually able to step back a little bit, and my wife has welcomed having me around a bit more. Don't know how long that'll go on for. She might very well find I'm imposing on her space too much eventually, but at the moment she's enjoying having me around. And it's forcing me to reflect on what I want next in terms of a work-life balance, because I am someone who does embroil themselves in work. I like working. I like working hard. I like achieving positive outcomes and helping others create a difference to the organizations I work in. But that sometimes has me overcommitting. And so I'm always saying yes, and I'm giving lots of time that probably I shouldn't be giving. So one of the things I'm reflecting on at the moment is, okay, in that next place where I want to share my dreams with whoever wants to employ me, I'm thinking, I need to make sure that I protect a bit of time for us, my wife and I, and the kids, 7 of them, the 1 grandchild, and other friends and family, such that it's not constantly on a treadmill. And so in answer to your question, I think it's a matter of perhaps stopping for a minute, having a look at your own life, individuals who are listening to this, and saying, is my work-life balance right? And can I adjust it? Because once you're on that treadmill, it's actually very hard to slow it down again and actually take that space away. So you need to find a catalyst for that. For me, that catalyst has been losing my job.
Yeah, and I think it's very good that you mentioned this point about the work bit and the life bit. And one of the other leaders on the series earlier said that actually in some ways we're trying to delude ourselves if we think it's work-life balance. It's never in balance, but it is a work-life integration. How do you integrate the two, but also create space to think? As a leader, you need space and time to think. So it's actually very good for you to have an interregnum, to have a sabbatical now before you take on your next big role, because then you can start thinking about where you add the value, what are your callings, what's your vocation, what's being on purpose, not off purpose. I still have this image, which will stay with me the rest of my life, being on mile 1 of the Inca Trail in the Sacred Valley, running along my life purpose, my route. And yet to be off purpose, you had to climb up out of the little area that had been cut into the ground to go on the sides, which are rockier. So I think you being back on purpose, doing what you're really good at and what you put on the planet to do is very important, Craig. And then that links me nicely onto the next question, the penultimate one, which is BQ, brand, reputation, image, and impact. You and I made a point of doing 360, which I always encourage all CEOs to do. They can sometimes delude themselves. They go, well, I'm fantastic. Everybody tells me I'm great. And all the toilets are freshly painted and smell nice of roses. Yeah, well, that's because you're the CEO. Have you had 20 people give you 360 feedback? And what is your learning? Well, I don't like what they say. Yeah, I know sometimes what they say is not what you want to hear, but it's how they perceive it. What's been your learning over 360 and why would you recommend it, if you do, to other CEOs and other leaders that they go through that process?
Well, I do recommend it. That would be the first thing to say. I think I've had several 360s done throughout my career. The first one I had done, I can remember we ended up getting feedback in a group, and I was sitting there looking at my feedback, feeling pretty smug about myself. This is decades ago. But there were other people in the room who were in tears. I've since had that tearing experience where the feedback has been pretty brutal, and you think, oh my God, the perception of other people of you as an individual, as a leader, and how they interpret you, which is their reality, isn't great. And you're the catalyst of my most recent 360 done in 2017. And it was, you remember this, it was pretty brutal for me. And we went through a program to work with my colleagues to try and build the right sort of characteristics in me to be able to help them be the best they could be, and catch them having success and doing great things. And I think we achieved that, and I'm very proud of. I'm proud of the way that you helped me go through that journey to make changes that made me a better leader, and I think I'm a better leader from that. And I've always said, and I still stand by this, that leadership development, which some people see as a weakness, I see as a great strength. And I've been privileged throughout my career to be involved with people like you and other leadership development coaches and mentors, because the people around me have been willing to support my involvement in those programs. And I've done the same. I think the mentoring, coaching, and development of people around you is a fundamental part of business development, and no one can do it on their own. And certainly at the top of the tree, and I've been there now for 15 years, is a pretty lonely place. And you sometimes need the support of somebody else to help you see the pathway forward, to be able to create a safe space for the review of your own thinking and the dilemmas that you're in. And 360 feedback, and then the intentions of what you're going to do with that, because just the 360 feedback's no good on its own. You actually got to do something with it, and that's what we did. That's what you
and brilliantly in the way that when you reflected on it, did your after action review, and you thought on it. As you said, at first, for many leaders, it's very hard to accept. And but then when you reflect on it and you decide if there's two behaviors, just two that I can work on that will make the biggest difference, which two are they going to be? And you really led the way on that, which leads me on to the legacy that you left, whether it be in your 7 years at the University of West of Scotland or other places you've been. What would you like your legacy to be when, sadly, like my dear brother David, who died last year, didn't expect it, he was only 63, but when we do die, people reflect on the legacy we've left, whether it be in your case, 7 kids and a grandchild. What would you like your legacy to be, both in your work and your personal life, in a sentence in each? What do you want people to say about you, Craig?
Yeah, I hope in my personal life that my children are picking up something from me in terms of my passion for helping others. Understand the value of education, that I think is crucial, and that to leave the world a better place is the responsibility of us all. And for me, that's been through a combination of education, the work I've done with equality, diversity, and inclusion, and also the work that I've been doing for the past 5 years around climate emergency and changes in that area as they relate to higher education. So yeah, that's what I'm hoping the personal life legacy might be with my children and friends who know me, and probably that overlaps into work as well. That I've never wanted a legacy in work that necessarily relates to Craig Mahoney did or Craig Mahoney achieved. For me, it's been far more about creating an influence for change that people have understood. For them to be able to take the mantle of whatever I set out to achieve in the first place, it still requires further work. Because as we said in the early part of this conversation, life and the world is constantly in transition. So nothing stays the same. And it's important that we set up things that are not dependent on ourselves. So my legacy has always been in organizations I've worked to make sure that whatever I've tried to do is not dependent on my presence. It's sustainable beyond me. And that's the legacy that I've always tried to create, that we set up the right journey, we create the right infrastructure for that to happen, that we get buy-in from the people around us by influence, and that people want to continue that legacy without me being still the leader of that organization. And certainly at UWS, where it was 9 years I was there, not 7, The legacy, I think, is sustainable, and I'm seeing people doing that now, and very proud for me that in the months after I left, that it was named as Scottish University of the Year, which I'm extremely proud of.
Oh, that's fantastic, Craig. Rightly so. Well done, you and all the people there in your team, which is my next bit. It's about teams, executive teams. You've been in situations, certainly in the 11 years that I've known, where sometimes you've inherited very good teams, sometimes you've inherited teams which have one or two toxic individuals in that you have to act upon, because like a rotten apple in a bowl, the rest of the fruit starts to go off as well.
Yeah.
And they sort of have, and soon you don't have that trust and loyalty, and the team isn't working together, it's working against each other and against you. What's your top tip to leaders when they've got a team that has somebody toxic in it, or the team just generally isn't high performing? Because high performance is something that interests you. What would be your advice?
Yeah, your metaphor is very good about the rotten fruit in a bowl and its impact on the other fruit. I think that's a perfect metaphor for the description that happens when somebody is cynical or toxic and unhelpful in a leadership team. And you've worked with me on a couple of those examples. I've always taken the attitude that I want to try and develop people and make them better. You've often advised me, Craig, and I think that's going to happen, and you're better off to cauterize this earlier rather than later. And I think my learning experience, and I'm never good at applying this, would be that if there is a toxic element to a team, cauterizing it quickly and removing it is absolutely essential. And if you don't do that, it will fester and cause further problems and disable you from being the leader that you can be with the aspirations that you want to bring into that team. I would caution here, of course, that individuals need to be aware of themselves, back to emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. I'm not implying you need to be a despot. So
no,
please understand that.
And I know that from having worked with you, that the pains you go to try and find a way to develop people. And I'm, clearly in my profession, I'm a great believer in developing. But at the same time, there are many moments where somebody's in the wrong job, in the wrong culture, doesn't fit with their values, and they're not the right fit. And to help them find their happiness somewhere else and be kind in the way that they are exited, as kind as you would be when you brought them in. So they can leave with dignity, and you don't destroy them, and you're not cruel to them. But also you provide some means for them to think about what is the next right move for them, or just not required anymore. So that's really important. Let's go on to the last two questions, which is favorite one or two books you have on leadership, and then if you could do the top tip at the end, and I'll cover that when we get there. But what about favorite books, Craig, and why would you recommend them to people listening?
Yeah, they're not necessarily, some of them are leadership books, but some of them are just books about the way in which a business needs to run, and even higher education, which is predominantly not for profit in the UK, is still a business and needs to be run accordingly. So one of the most impactful books that I came across in my early part of leadership was a book called Peak Performance, and how it relates to business. And it's a book that profiles successful teams in sport. And at the time when it was written, in the early 2000s, the teams that were successful in sport were the Australian cricket team, the Williams Formula One team, American football teams, and a variety of other teams that had sustained success. What was making them have success year after year after year? And it was saying these principles apply to business, but they're taken from sport. And it was a book that had a big impact on me, because I thought, okay, these are the sort of things I need to understand better if I want to be a successful leader in higher education. And it also related to sport. And then more recently, a book that, one of the copies of a book that you brought to my attention was a book by Stephen Covey, which was First Things First. And that was a great book for me to understand more about his dynamic understanding of leadership and the work that he'd done around looking at the characteristics that made leaders and things that you needed to take into account. And then finally, a book that only came out in the last year or so, which is Leadership Transitions in Universities, which is written here in the UK about UK universities, and looking at the concept of universities in transition, but also leaders in transition as they go from a role which is not the Vice-Chancellor, which is the Chief Executive, from a role that isn't that up to being the Vice Chancellor and therefore the Chief Executive, and the transition that you have to go through. As you've said to me on many occasions, the skills and the abilities that got you to the job and the role you're at now may not be the ones that you need for the next job that you take, particularly if it's a promotion and elevation above where you are now. And you know, that is such a strong message. And so 3 examples of leadership books for me that have impacted on my career, and you know, created a positive change to me.
Yeah, great, Craig, and I do find all those very interesting. And as the saying goes, I think it was one of my coaching mentors to me, Marshall Goldsmith, said, "What got you here won't get you there." I think was the name of his particular book, which is, but the saying is the same, that the early experiences you have aren't necessarily the right ones for the next one. I think of some of the young McKinsey analysts. They're great as an analyst, but that won't make them a partner in McKinsey. If they carry on being like that, they're going to have to shift and evolve. Okay, so if you just very briefly, Craig, because this is part of this session and it stands in its own right, just introduce yourself and share your 2-minute top leadership tip. Over to you.
Well, I'm Craig Mahoney, Australian born, but British citizen now. Worked in the UK for 30 odd years in higher education. And my top tip as a leader would be, don't take yourself too seriously. And by that, what I mean is that none of us is irreplaceable, and that there's a time and a place for us to be a leader, but be open, be willing to listen to others. Don't assume you know all the answers, because there's a wealth of knowledge out there. Everybody's opinion can matter and make a difference. And so therefore be sponge-like in your leadership behavior. Listen to a variety of people and be prepared to change. Certainly things which are changeable in terms of what you aspire to be, but at the same time maintain your own moral compass, as we spoke of earlier.
Yeah, great, Craig. Fantastic as always. Thank you very much, Craig Mahoney, for being on the Inspiring Leadership series. Lovely wisdom and experience, and people are very lucky if they can learn from you and pick up these tips. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.